You probably do this all the time. I know I do, but we shouldn't, and I'll tell you why. First, what am I talking about? This is about writing select star for your queries. So why do we write select star? Well, it's just easy. We can use a single character to get all of the columns from a table. In our application or reporting tool that runs the query, we can just ignore the columns that we don't need. It saves time. However, there are 4 reasons why I recommend not using select star in code that you want to keep or deploy, but there's one exception to that. The first reason is that a query like this is inefficient. You use select star and the database returns all of the columns from the table. It's likely that you don't need all of the columns, so you work with some of the columns from the table and ignore the rest. This means the database is returning more data than you need back to the client, which is inefficient and wasteful. The second reason is that indexes might not be used. Indexes are database objects that help improve the performance of your queries. They are created to help with a specific type or range of queries, and the columns that are being retrieved from a table are one of the factors that the database uses to decide which index to use. If the query retrieves all columns in a table, the database may decide not to use an index. But the index could have been used if the query only retrieved the few columns you needed. This can cause the query to run slower than you want, and it can be hard to improve. If you want a quick reference guide for many common SQL commands and features, and stop forgetting the syntax for SQL, you'll love the SQL cheat sheets I created. Get your copy at the link in the description. The third reason is that your query or code might break if changes are made to the table. A select star query does not specify the columns in the select clause. If a column is added to the table, it will show up in the select star query without any changes. If a column is removed from the table, it will no longer show in the query. This may seem okay, but it can have an undesired effect on your queries. The modification of a query can cause the results to change, or the query to slow down, even though you didn't change the query itself. Reason number 4 is that a select star query is hard to maintain. With a select star query, it's hard to read it and know what columns are being returned. If you're using it in application code, you don't know what the columns are called, so you can't work with them in your code. In a reporting tool, it's also harder to work with them. You need to take the extra step of looking into the table to see what the columns are called, which can slow things down and make the code harder to work with. However, there's one exception to where I think it's okay to use select star, and that is for quick or ad hoc queries where you just want to see what's inside a table. I use it a lot when looking at data in tables, when I've loaded a sample dataset, or when I'm starting to work with a new database. It helps to understand what's in the table and what the columns are called. But it shouldn't be used for any feature development or production code. Speaking of data analysis, exploring a database and finding out what the data represents is a common task for all of us working with SQL. You'll want to watch this video next to see an example of loading a sample database, querying the tables to understand the data, and using SQL to answer some questions about the data. Thanks for watching.